Hello and welcome to HNB Conversations with Cosmo and Rivka.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's good to be back. And we're going to go ahead and jump right into getting our question for the day. And so, Antonio, why don't you hit us with that first question?
All right. What is the hardest challenge you've had to overcome in your life?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. The
That's
hardest.
Not a small question.
Well, yeah, no, it's not a small question. What's
It's a good thing we just jumped right in.
Yeah, right? What's the hardest challenge? I'm going to let you go first, babe.
Oh, that's so generous of you.
Well, I try.
The hardest challenge of my life?
The hardest challenge that you've had to go through in your life. Overcome.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know that that's something I want to put out on air. You know what? Since I seem to have a plethora of answers, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Oh, I don't know. It's to me, that's such a wide-ranging question. I mean, the hardest, I feel like most of my hardest challenges, I still haven't finished overcoming.
I would agree.
That's it's sort of
be like from what time period? Like from 0 to 6 months? From what are we talking about here? Because I've got so many.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah. So let's pick an age range.
Okay.
Because I know
Yeah. I've obviously for me the hardest challenge has to do with just an ongoing battling of my own desire for comfort or me first and those things that are an ongoing way of what it is to take up your cross and die daily.
Okay, right.
You know what I mean?
But let's say, because that just always plays in to all of our conversations.
Yeah,
because that's
sure.
a regular theme throughout our lives, right? So let's think about what was the most recent, really hard challenge that you found yourself really having to lean on the guidance of the Lord to walk.
Well, that's easy for me then. Not easy. It's excruciatingly difficult for me, but it's been the hardest challenge, and that's been honestly this whole transition from in the way that we do ministry. Okay. So for me, all of my, as a little boy, my mom would always tell the story of how, when we were sitting in church and I'm 3 years old and she's telling me to be quiet and I'm like, someday, Mom, I'm going to be up there and you're going to have to be quiet. And then,
you're like, that will never, ever happen.
That my mom would never be quiet.
Yeah.
And then, at 7 years old,
I don't mean that rudely. I mean, that's just a fact of life. She had a lot to share.
Yes.
A lot of joy.
And then, I set up and preached, set up a thing in my neighborhood and, right outside my house. Right outside my house, I set up chairs.
People set up those kinds of things in neighborhoods too. They're called churches.
No, and so I was waiting for my dad to come home from work, and it always made me laugh because I preached Psalm 100 and Genesis 1:1, and because they were the passages that I had memorized, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why my dad was always like, "It's amazing, those two passages, they go together perfectly." And how he knew to put them together. And I was always internally I don't know what you're talking about. I
just stood there, smiled, and
so, and then call to the Lord. I started, first time I preached in my youth ministry when I was in high school was when I was 16. The Lord had called me into ministry. And so there was a way.
Preach, huh?
They let me preach, yeah. And so there was then, I go to Bible college, I go to seminary. And there's no place, you used to joke with me I felt like it was my living room. There was no place I feel more comfortable and at home than on a platform, behind the pulpit, in front of people with their faces where I can see them.
Yeah. I don't think that's the only reason that's your favorite place because people aren't allowed to ask questions or argue or the most they can do is get up and walk out and there's not a lot of people
but the whole environment, everything you're trained for, everything that I was prepared for There was a vision of what that looked like. And when we first, when the pandemic first hit and we started doing online teaching and preaching, that was challenging. First of all, because, I can see when I'm preaching or I'm teaching, I can see when things are connecting by people's facial feedback, and I can know when to slow down, when to elaborate. I can generally read some of that to a degree. At least there is some feedback there you're getting.
Sure.
At least from the friendly faces, But you do spot the people that are glaring at you as well. You can't not miss that as well. And I can see if my wife's pointing at her watch or something like that.
I've never, ever, ever pointed at my watch. Not ever. Although that is a pastor's wife thing to do. That is not something I had to do. I simply texted you.
And then you would hear it ding.
And you would hear it ding, and you knew that was me. But I never pointed at my watch. Come on now.
So suddenly I'm looking at a camera, and I'm not seeing smiling faces. I'm not hearing people laugh at the right points and at the right places. And
you're like a comedian on stage, and you're like, "This is falling flat." Okay,
this
isn't working well.
But it was this real challenge. And then what made it exceptionally difficult was during that season when I knew we had been praying and just praying about what the Lord was calling us to do and how He was calling us to respond. And when the Lord called us to sell our building, and our congregation honestly wasn't in any kind of financial difficulty. This wasn't a financial decision. That I knew it, but boy, did I wrestle with it. Because I loved that place. I loved it. Every time I would walk in that door, I would be like, I loved it. And
right, and you also are a creature of habit. So like, if something works for you, you don't actually change things up at all. As to where I get bored pretty quickly, you go, oh, I like this. I like how this works. So you don't shift to the left or to the right. You just keep going in that direction. So everything about it, you just were like, this is great. Why would I change anything?
Right. And I remember in 2019, in 2019 when we in February of 2019, we'd come before the congregation with...
What year was it?
2019.
Oh, okay.
With, what do you think I said?
You said 2019 like 3 times in a row. So I'm sorry.
Had I?
Yeah, you said you're in 2019. So like in 2019, so it was something like that. Okay. So I'm sorry.
In February, we had brought before the congregation just a really honed, clarifying vision of what the Lord was calling us to do, to walk the call of Israel, and to go outside of the 4 walls.
It brought us back to the fact that we are who God was calling.
Because people, the people that we need to reach aren't going to come to where we are. We need to go where they are. And the Lord had given a word, a word of knowledge, a word of prophecy that the Lord was giving in 2018, that the Lord was laying the infrastructure, that He was going to be doing things in a way that we had never imagined. And you and I would get in the car and we'd be like, what does that mean?
What does that even mean?
And then the Lord had called us to prepare the house, prepare the building. So we made the place we made the building beautiful. And you kept saying, I feel like, it has that feeling like when you're fixing it to sell it. But in Rivka's own mind, that even in then, it was the idea that we would sell this building to buy.
Well, I don't think any one of us, when we hear something from the Lord, like, it is the truth of what's going to happen, and we think we understand what that truth is, and it does happen, just not the way
we're filtering it through our own.
It's not usually the exact way we thought it was going to look.
So when, and then at the end of the year, at the end of 2019, what year was it? That's right, 2019. Rivka had come before our whole, she was in before our leadership team on a Saturday afternoon.
It was
December. It was December going into 2020.
Okay, that's right, because it wasn't 2020.
Because it was still 2019.
And every year the Lord would give me a vision and a word for the next year, like every single year. And this year, I was like, I stood up to talk to all our leaders, and I just said, I'm the only thing I'm getting from the Lord. Like, all I see in front of me is blank. It's like just dark. It's just a blank, dark space. And I'm hearing from the Lord that we're going to have to be bold, and we are going to have to be brave.
Yeah.
That's
and
all
so
I'm getting.
again, you filter that through like, well, okay, what does that mean?
And I think a lot of people filtered it the way they wanted to filter that.
Right. And so when everyone was wanting to quote unquote open up, and we were like, we never closed, the Lord has just shifted the way that we're doing things. And suddenly, as we were doing daily manna, there was a sense of connection and relationship, and a diving into the Word together in a way that was like it was daily.
Well, I mean, people would always say, oh, we should do this, and oh, we should do that, and oh, we should have a Bible study, or oh, we should have a prayer meeting. And we would go to do those things, and hardly anybody would show up to them.
True.
It wasn't that we weren't trying to do these things, but people wouldn't show up to them. And that was like twice a week, right?
And
that was a Saturday,
yeah,
and then maybe a Wednesday night or a Thursday night. And then all of a sudden, you're on 5 days a week.
6 days, including Shabbat.
Yeah.
And then, so when the Lord began to kind of tap on my heart, like Rivka, I think, could sense it loud and clear. And I did, you know how when someone's telling you something that you don't want to hear, so it's almost like you pretend that you don't hear it. Like the sense of that we were going to be selling the building, moving on from the building, was something that I was really wrestling with. I was trying to do we could do this and do the building. You know, that's I was
remember that conversation.
And so, in fact, I remember getting an article just as the Lord was talking about us. That Lauren actually had sent me an article called New Wineskins. And then a little bit later in the year, or the beginning of 2021, we were away for a week to pray, and as I'm praying, and I was reading this book, Kingdom of God book, and whatever, and I looked down at the footnote for a statement that I really liked, and it was a footnote from a book called The Problem of Wineskins, and I got on Kindle and downloaded that book for $7. It was written in 1975, The Problem of Wineskins, something about in a technological age. It's the year I'm born, funny. Talking about a technological, but it was the most technological things had been. And so one of the things right at the beginning was, if we wanted to do something revolutionary, we would sell our buildings, and it began to go into, in
1975.
Yeah, this was in 1975 that was written. But he was like, no one would ever do that. So anyway, that whole challenge, I think a lot of people, things weren't difficult until, we weren't like, well, we need to sell it because of financial difficulties. But when we announced we were going to sell it, then you did have a large contingent of people that were like, well, we're going to go elsewhere.
Well, again, I think a lot of people, because of everything that had happened, I think had 2020 not happened and the Lord spoke to us, of course we would have lost a lot of people, because I don't think people are interested in doing ministry that requires too much of them. Because ministry requires too much of all of us. That's how come we have to have this real reliance on the Lord, because it's just not naturally in us to be able to give of us ourselves in this way. And so I think, absolutely people would have been like, yeah, I'm out of here. But there would have been, that group of people that was like, okay, well, all right, if you feel like this is okay, this is amazing. But after everything was the way it was with 2020, the way it was perceived was as though we were being weak and somehow caving in a way that was not at all what we were doing. We were truly listening to the Lord. And so we got a lot of pushback and anger from people that we dearly loved, because they really truly felt like we were somehow compromising or abandoning them.
Yeah.
And we weren't abandoning anyone.
And this was because what we kept saying and what we continue to say is, because people say, are you guys going to open? It's like, are you kidding? We've never, ever
We
closed.
do more now than we've ever done.
And
It was really painful for you.
It was so hard because I gotta say, I know I've said this, and I know, of course, I've said this. You've heard me on this any number of times, but for everybody that thinks it was hard for them, that they lost the way we came together on a particular Shabbat every once a week, if the loss that I felt, what I felt like I was having to lay down, was so much for me. It was my identity was wrapped up in it to such a degree that in the way that we did things, the idea that I knew the criticism, I understood the things that I don't like to not be liked, or I don't like people to be angry with me. Who does? But it was undoubtedly, no, there's actually no question about that. This was, the biggest challenge I faced because to be honest, it would have taken no courage or bravery for me
to stay,
to go, hey, you know what? We're gonna open back up. Like I was never.
That's what everybody wanted.
We were never afraid of
Right.
a virus.
No.
We were always, our heart was always to love and protect the people that were vulnerable. But we were not walking in fear or in any of that. But it would have been what took the most internal fortitude and strength, that it was to say, I know that that's what you want. I just can't. We have to obey the Lord,
right.
not obey
what we feel like we want.
what I ache for, or what I
Right.
want.
A lot of people have this idea that if the Lord wants you to do something, that you're going to want to do it, and that's just actually not something that we see biblically. Usually, when God calls any of the prophets or leaders or His own people, these aren't typically things they really are excited about going in and doing. And a lot of times they're terrified.
Moses resisted.
Yeah, I mean, and so,
Jonah.
but I've had so many believers go, well, if the Lord wants us to do it, then He'll give us the desire to do it. When ultimately our desire is supposed to be to obey the Lord. It's not about wanting or not wanting to do something. And I was going to say that I think for you, like, you really hit the nail on the head there when you talked about your whole identity was wrapped up in this.
Yeah.
When our identity is not supposed to be a building or a way in which we're doing something, our identity is supposed to be in the Lord.
I remember there came this point actually when we had moved things into the house, and my office at the building was like, I loved it.
It was something.
I loved it. It had all my books. It was like, it's like a
It
library.
was the
in
one
there.
room I was not allowed to like go in and update and change or anything. And it was so hard to be in there because talk about clutter.
I loved it.
Oh my word.
So we bring it home, and I'm so because now it's in our home, and so we have minimized space, and so I'm trying to envision how I'm gonna pack everything in here, and Riv's like, no, it's not going in here like that. And I had this moment where what I was wrestling with really came out, because it was the one argument we've ever had in our life. No,
Oh, wow.
but I came to this point, and I was like, haven't I given up enough? Haven't I surrendered enough? Haven't I lost enough? Can't I have this one thing? And what I was even expressing there was, sorry if I'm yelling, what I was expressing there was revealing of how I was angry with the Lord, how on one level I resented it.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is that in that moment, it was also revealing how we, not just you, but like how we can be really self-centered, because you were saying, haven't I given up enough, when the Lord Himself literally died, and people around the world give up so much more every single day. And for me, one of the hardest things for me is I was literally giving up my home for the entire ministry to move into.
Yeah.
I gave up like the entire downstairs So we had just our bedrooms upstairs, and we created a family room upstairs for us to be in. But other than that, I lost autonomy over my home. That was a really hard thing for me.
Sure.
But I wasn't sitting there making it about myself.
Well,
I was like, well, I guess we're going to have to do this and that. And
So it was, and it's still, not still, but like, just as I think about it, just emotionally, it was a loss. And look, the reality is, it was not a lot of Messianic congregations own their own building.
right.
Usually, most Messianic fellowships are renting from a church,
And I think most people thought we shut down. Like, I to this day, I think people don't believe us when we say we didn't do this because we were financially in trouble.
Yeah, right. I know.
I think that they think they were like, well, they never did open up again, and they never did bring back. So, what happens? You end up starting to financially struggle when genuinely that was not an issue.
It really wasn't. But then it did. What's the word I'm looking for? It certainly did. People did leave after that decision.
Because they didn't understand.
And, the thing was, and continues to be, that look, changing and doing things in a new way. It's funny, 2017 is when we changed to House of New Beginnings. Lord's doing a new thing in our midst. Don't forget the former things. I'm doing a new thing among you. And again, we always have we have our own vision of what that's going to look like. And here he was doing something that was new, and we can talk all day long about, we need to do it like they did it in Acts. But the moment we do, like, there were people that were like, there were folks that said to me, look, a kehillah, which is the Hebrew word for like a church, let's say, for a gathering, isn't just 10 people. And I'm like,
literally,
actually, a minyan in Hebrew is 10 men, like, to have a gathering. So because it wasn't that we ever stopped gathering. And it wasn't that the opportunity to meet together, people were like, well, the Bible says, neglect not the gathering of the fellowship of the brethren, gathering together in Hebrews chapter 10. And I'm like, but we haven't stopped gathering.
I think what it revealed,
and it was like people wanted to gather on their terms.
Right. That's what I say. Like, I think what it revealed that I found struggle, like a struggle for me, because we pour ourselves into our people. We love our people. With the culture that we had with our congregation was like your family, So we pour ourselves into people. And when it came down to it, some of the most, spiritually mature people that I had thought were the most spiritually mature people, when they had their complaints or their frustrations and why they were leaving, it was truly all about themselves. None of it was about like, okay, now I am a mature believer and God has brought me to this place. So now it's time for me to become a minister as well.
Right.
Because we go by, now we're a ministry of ministers. And being in ministry is hard, and it's dying to self. And it's a lack of, because that God wants us to completely rely on him. And so I was just really sad, like really brokenhearted for how many I thought had so much more and just didn't. And I think I have that wound. It feels like a wound where I was just disappointed in and I don't think any of these people were bad people or anything like that. I think it's just an unawareness of how much we pull for ourselves without realizing, like, we genuinely believe that God has saved us because he needs us and he wants us, which he does want us, and it's me and him, instead of recognizing that we are saved and then we are called to now become ministers. It's not just about taking from the Lord for the rest of our lives, trying to just, have better self-love and self-care and all that. Well,
and this, I remember a few years earlier we had tried to start what we call Chaim groups, life groups, and we were really it was difficult to get them off the ground, to get and so the challenge becomes like it just, because we're saying, okay, we're gonna teach and preach the word. Look, I think one of the hardest parts for me on a fleshly level had to do with how I measured success is that on one level, a room, even if it's not a huge room, but a room that's full of people that I can see, feels like we're succeeding. And whether or not there's fruitfulness in our lives doesn't end up being the measure. I'm measuring it based on the number of faces I can see in the room, the number of amens, and the sense, afterward, there's the feeling of when we're talking and we're engaging and there was a sense of connectedness and closeness. But on one level, all of that, not all of it, but a great deal of it was illusion. It was an illusion because we didn't know folks from Monday to Friday.
I think everybody lives with that illusion, though.
Yeah.
I think most of us live with that illusion. We just don't know that we're living with it.
And so, look, I mean, for anyone that's been for the last 3.5 years, for you, those of you who are in Daily Manna every day, there is something that is a genuine connection that we have that is real. It's not an illusion. It's real. And as we grow together in the Word, as we connect, and when we are able to take that to the next level of being in community groups, and we're able to take that,
and I think that's what's also challenging is that
it continues to be the challenge.
Because again, it's easy to watch something or listen to something. It is hard to give of yourself when we're all giving of ourselves every day. I think people misunderstood. I remember for years being in ministry and having all my kids and listening to other people tell me how they don't have time to do this or they don't have time to do that because they have their kids or they have this or they have that. And it wasn't that I didn't have all of those things as well.
Right.
It's just that I also was doing ministry. And so, and I'm not trying to criticize anyone here. I am just saying that God is calling all of us to step out, and He will give us the grace to be able to do it when we walk in obedience to Him. When we're not interested in hearing, or we're like, I can't tell you how many people I have had tell me, well, I'm just kind of like here for me. Like, this is like my time. Okay, so pastors and pastors' wives and anyone in ministry, missionaries, whatever, across the world, like, when is their time? People forget, like, they're giving of themselves as well. And when the whole point Israel was called was to reach the nations. So when we're grafted in, that is now all of our calling. Right. So it doesn't matter if you're reaching people in your workplace or if you're reaching people in your neighborhood or if you're just having some people over for dinner to visit with them and build community in that way and share the gospel. We're all called to be in some sort of pouring out of ourselves in ministry. Like your great-grandfather was given a Bible from a coal miner that he worked with, and then that created your whole family to be able to get saved. Had he not done that because he was just like, well, I'm not in church right now, this is my workplace, and I'm not actually called into ministry, who knows?
Well, and I think that was part of what I had to, part of what I have to live with is this now. Mm-hmm. I don't get easy, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, this easy way to calculate success that I did, like where I could tell myself, look, room's full, bank account's full, we're succeeding. Mm-hmm. Because first of all, I don't get to see or hear when I have to preach the word, when I'm teaching, I don't get to hear or see the feedback immediately. So I have to live off. That was one of the early challenges, was preaching online meant I couldn't.
Instead of looking for man's affirmation, you just had to really rely on the Lord.
And what it revealed was to the degree to which I did look for man. I didn't realize it. It
we
revealed to myself the degree that. And then.
I care about how I look
secondly,
when I walk out the door because I care about what people think.
What I have to know is that as I walk in faithfulness, it's been interesting. There have been moments where I'll get an email here and there and on different occasions from people who have express to me what the ministry has meant to them online, but they never actually say hello.
Right.
They never say something in the chat.
Right.
Like
that would
there's
be like if I were listening to somebody, I wouldn't actually engage in the chat because
right.
I'm
and
not an extrovert.
Right.
So I wouldn't
I just
do that.
wish they would. And so, but this idea that there, you remember that song, "Thank You for Giving to the Lord," and what you basically, there's a day that when you stand there and all of a sudden you see the fruitfulness of what you've given to the Lord that you didn't see in life, that there is the reality that just as that guy that ministered to my great-grandfather never saw the full fruitfulness of that, that it becomes clearer later. What we don't know is the fruitfulness of how a message preached today could, in 10 years, someone see exactly when they need to see it, and we'll never see that or know that or whatever. And to live with saying, Lord, I want to be faithful to you. And
yeah, and we still don't. So like right now what's happening in our world is that anti-Semitism is like at a peak. It's the same place it was right before World War II. And with everything that's happened recently, you have lots and lots of Jewish people coming out saying, okay, well, now we know who stands with us. Now we know who's willing to speak out, because there's been so much silence from not everybody. I think there's a good deal of people who are speaking out, but there's a greater deal of people who aren't. And so when Jewish people feel this way, the majority of Jewish people will back up and stick with people that they felt supported for or supported by. And they actually won't go to church because in their minds, because Hitler came from the place of, as a Christian, he identified as a Christian and would call Jews Christ killers and would justify murdering Jews for that reason. So from their perspective, it's Christians who persecuted them, hates them, all of that. So those who are not actually saved, and maybe some who have gone but looked around like, okay, I don't know what's happening here, they're not going to be running into churches. Okay. So for all we know, because we never could have seen this specific thing coming. We could have never seen 2020 coming and the pandemic and all of that. But the Lord knows, and he knows everything. So if we're at a time where, and when we did this, by the way, I think there are more and more of us around the country. And I think when the Lord was speaking to us, we weren't the only ones that the Lord was speaking to. But when we had to step out in faith and do this, it was at a time we knew no one else that was.
Right.
We didn't know anybody else, and so it felt like madness. And there wasn't anyone that I personally knew other than like our board, who all had a peace from the Lord, who all were in agreement. There wasn't anybody in ministry or anything like that would be in agreement with what we were doing. It was truly like stepping out of the boat
feeling
into
alone.
The water, feeling like, okay, I'm going to sink at any moment.
Yeah.
But we don't know what is to come. And so if God has called us into this place of ministry, and if people have Jewish friends and neighbors, or if they want to create a community group, or even churches that want to develop something because they recognize that Jewish people are a part of our, or not just ours, like a part of the call to win to the Lord, you have to have something that they will feel comfortable coming to. And so
right. Well, this
is what that's all for.
You know, it's so funny. Years ago, when we first started even streaming services, this just tells you where I was even then, back in 2016. When you brought to me the idea of, hey, I really feel like we need to be streaming. I've been praying, feel like we need to be online streaming. And my initial reaction was no, because if people can just watch online, then they won't come into the building. Like, they won't come. And my whole focus was in that building, on the people we could get into that place. And the Lord had to slowly or painfully
like everybody streams
peel
now.
It away. And then she came to me saying, she goes, listen, maybe a couple of days a week you could do like a teaching or something. And I was like, do you know how much extra that is? Do you know how much, like, it's like just preparing for one message a week is the number of hours that I have put into one message. Do you have any idea? And so you look at the front end of things, and you have one picture, one vision of what you imagine it'll look like. And on the other side of it, you go, oh, I like, you think about, I think about how before Yeshua, how people would have tried to read Isaiah 53. No one was going to walk away from that going, so what's going to happen is,
Right.
but afterward
yeah.
you go, oh, and
Right.
it became clear, right? And I was, it's funny, I was talking to, or I don't know that we had a long conversation about it, but I was talking to Rivka's dad, and years ago he had started, he had made his website and his allisrael2020.org. And the vision was to see all Israel come to Messiah by the year 2020, right? And it had, of course, the nice play on words with 2020 vision, so forth and so on. And so as he's hit this season of his life and going, guess not, when 2020 came, it was,
Awful.
Awful. But then I stop and I look and I go, maybe, though, even without you knowing it, the Lord could have begin preparing to say that 2020 is going to kickstart something that you haven't even begun to imagine. That on the other side of 2020 is when there can be a really renewed and clear vision about what the Lord wants to do. Because the infrastructure that we kept hearing about is in place in a way that where we can impact people that would never come through our doors. Mm-hmm. And you can't go door to door effectively, but we can get onto people's phones and into their homes via their computer and via YouTube and on their television. And it may not be a ton, but it's little by little, moment by moment, person by person, being who we're called to be, doing what we're called to do, and trusting the Lord to bring forth the fruit. Anyway, all that to say.
That was your hardest.
All that to say,
thing.
it has been, and on some level continues to be, because it's not. It
certainly hasn't gotten easier.
Yeah, it is definitely the most challenging thing that I have gone through in my life. So,
yeah, that is probably for you. It's not the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. Mm-hmm. Going through what we went through, I think that there are a lot more other things that I've had to go through that I think would be challenging. I think it was one of the most disappointing seasons of my life, just because of what I think I had a whole lot more faith in humanity than I realized. And I'm not criticizing any one individual or anything like that. I think just as a whole, I think I was just like, oh wow, okay, like didn't see that coming. For me, I guess if we're gonna talk about me now, for me, I would think that one of the things that, if I look back on my whole life, I have lots of different things that were really, really challenging to work through. But if I was going to probably if I was going to probably talk about, what was the question again? The
most challenging. What's the most challenging thing that you've ever faced, gone through in your life?
It's just the question.
What's the hardest challenge you've had to overcome?
What's the hardest challenge you've had to overcome in your life?
So I think for me, one of the hardest challenges that I've had to overcome, probably to date to this point, the hardest challenge was probably last year when my niece Ariana was killed in a car accident.
Yeah.
I think I had to, I responded in a way that I had never been in that situation before. So emotionally and even physically, what I experienced, even when I found out that my nieces had been in a car accident, it was surprising to me how I, on some level physically, stopped functioning in that moment. Like when I found out my son Giovanni was there, and I had gotten off the phone with my brother, and he had been yelling at me on the phone, like, yeah, get to the hospital. So I'm like, okay. And so I hung up the phone and I stood up, and I buckled over, and my son Giovanni was there, and he grabbed me to hold me. And I was like, because I had to go tell my other children. I didn't want to tell them anything because I didn't know anything. Somewhere in me, I knew this is really, really bad. And I was surprised because normally I'm the person in a crisis that's like super calm, super together, and like, whenever something goes wrong or whatever, I'm the person that people usually come to. If something happens with the kids, it's Cosmo's always like, Rivka, like looking to me like, what do we do now? Kind of, sort of. And so that was surprising to me. And then going through everything that we experienced as our family, our extended family, all of us experienced such a deep, profound loss. Having to walk with my brother and sister-in-law and my nieces and my nephews, and feeling so helpless, feeling so tremendously helpless to relieve my brother Jonathan.
There was nothing what could you do?
No, I know. There was absolutely nothing that I could do, nothing that anybody could do. It was the most powerless situation that all of us ever felt like we were in. My parents were completely, of course, devastated. And the word devastated and the word helpless, like, these are words now that have new meaning to me. Mm-hmm. Because before this, those words were totally differently defined by me emotionally. Right. When I say them now, it almost feels like hopelessness attached to them. And then what I was able to experience and seeing in my brother and sister-in-law, and how God's grace in them, that doesn't mean that their pain wasn't and isn't still there. But for me, watching their faith in the Lord grow stronger and their reliance on God be more solid and like
just unwavering. It's like,
yeah, like unwavering, right? And for me, I had never felt like I would waver from the Lord. I feel like I have gone through several different crisis of faith in my life, and I have pulled through just fine. And I mean, I love the Lord, and He and I are tight. I never ever thought that I would come to a place where I was like experiencing emotions that caused doubt in me. Because I didn't know that could happen. Like, I didn't know that was in there. And I didn't anticipate it. And I didn't even intentionally think it. It was just all of a sudden I came to this place like, well, hold on just a second here. Why would He let this happen? Why would He, it was such a hard thing. And it wasn't something that I could process out of. It wasn't something that I could... it wasn't something that I was helpless in that moment as to what I was experiencing emotionally with the Lord.
And it wasn't the time to come with, like, for me to come with theological answers.
Well, no, and I really never find your theological answers helpful.
Thank you.
No, what I mean is, like, you can give people pat answers. Yeah. It doesn't change their circumstances or their emotional experience.
Right.
Like, people have to process through things.
Right. That was, my goal was not to give you theological answers in that.
Right.
Because it was, it was the kind of thing that when you hit these moments that shake you, the Lord is strong to bring you through it.
Right.
But you have to walk through that.
Well, right. And so one of the things that I did learn about the Lord, because there was a long period of time there, I tried to pray. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I tried to worship. I just couldn't. And it wasn't that I didn't want to. I really couldn't. And it was shocking to me. It was shocking to me. I felt like I was weak. I felt like I was not I'm supposed to be a mature believer. I'm in my late 40s, and I was not rallying the way I would have thought I would hope that I could rally. I don't know what I thought that would look like, but it certainly didn't look like what I was going through, and it was nothing that I was doing intentionally. But the one thing that I did learn about the Lord through that entire process, like I would say to Him over and over again, I know You're real. I believe You're real. I know You're there. But this is where my flesh is at. Like that whole, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Like my flesh was broken and in pain. And I could not engage the way I wanted to. So I was so impressed with Jonathan and Monica because they were, I mean, at the feet of Jesus every day, still every day, broken, but leaning on him and loving him and feeling close and close and closer to him. And I didn't have that experience. Now, I have had other friends who have lost children, or a friend who's lost a child who has said there's a special grace that parents seem to get, which I'm so thankful for, because I can't imagine surviving something like that emotionally, or like just not at all. And so what I did learn about the Lord is that I never once in the entire time I struggled to just talk to him other than I can't. I never once felt judged by the Lord. I never once felt like he felt rejected by me. I never felt condemned by God. I felt like he was a loving parent that was like understood he had been there and was like, it's okay. It's okay. Like he knows the big picture, right? So he knows my heart better than I know my heart. So he knows my heart loves him. He knows my heart believes in him. He knows my heart desires for him, but he has grace for my flesh in those moments, because he doesn't judge me by my actions. He's judging me by my heart, and my actions, my flesh was trying but was so broken. And so it took a really, really long time for me to get back there, and I did go through the stages of grief, but my grief wasn't just in losing my niece. My grief was in my son losing his, cousin counterpart and his, best friend, and my brother and sister-in-law going through excruciating pain, my nieces and nephews going through excruciating pain, my parents going through
I always remember, I'll never forget the night that it happened.
You probably want to move closer to
I'll never forget the night that it happened. We were at the hospital, and your younger brother was like
struggling.
He was like, this is Jonathan, like he's the best of us. How could this, of all the people, how could this happen to him? And it was this, it shatters this
security that you think you have.
The simplicity sometimes, the simplistic kind of
like if you
A
do
plus
everything
B
right,
equals C theology. That is super pat. That when something like this happens, when you're shaken to your core and the foundations are bared, what's there, and how do you come through it?
I know we're all changed.
Yeah,
I mean, none of us are the same as we were before, and there are things that like I worry about for my. I think there was an innocence to my youngest that isn't there anymore. There's conversations that he and I have had to have. He's been through more loss at this point in his life than any of us had been in at that point.
I remember being in my early 30s, being able to say, because most of my grandparents had died, other than my one, had died before I was like 4 years old. I remember being able to be like, I don't really know anyone close to me that's died. And I was in my 30s.
Right.
And here our 11-year-old had experienced this loss that was, how could he process that?
Right. And I sometimes don't know if he still has. But, and so then I, as a mother, am going, how do I walk my child through this? How does he learn to understand who God is and a loving, caring, good God when I'm struggling right now in that? And so we've had to walk our children through things. We've had to walk together as families, as a large family together, as private families together. And that was really, really hard. But I will say that the further we move forward, what I learn about myself is that you can question God. You can love God, believe in God, and doubt God, because you can have all those emotions that like mix all up in there together.
Yeah.
You can be angry with the Lord and him not be offended or reject you, but be an understanding, loving, caring Father, and that now, like when I talk, before I could know all the same things, and I was not affected the way I'm affected now. And what I mean by that is, when I hear about someone's loss, when I hear about the loss of a child, when I hear about a car accident, like I think it was Rivka that came to me, and there was a family recently somewhere in the United States, I don't know where, but she had come across this article. It was breaking news, and there had been a car accident, and 3 sisters had been in the car, and they'd been killed. All 3 girls had been killed in this car accident, and I felt such grief for this family that I could never have experienced before, and then gratitude because we didn't lose all 3 girls that were in the car for us, and then sadness for myself. I was just like, but then you feel bad, like, oh, like, is that okay to even feel? Because is that like saying, well, better you than me kind of a thing?
No.
And right, but those are the emotions that I go through. But I'm at this point, when people talk to me about their pain, I experience it on a level that makes me emotional now.
Yeah.
Because I feel it so much more. And so I am thankful for that, because I feel like if I can feel people's pain, then I can minister to them better. So for me, you know, that was, this hasn't been the funnest podcast, but
No, back to back.
But for me, that has been probably the most challenging thing that I've ever, you know, had to walk through.
And my prayer is that
it doesn't ever happen to anybody.
That's the top.
Yeah.
That's I'm like, okay, Lord, I don't want to, please.
You know, we have a really good family, our extended family and our private family. And yesterday was our daughter's Cassini's 18th birthday. And so everybody's over here and we're celebrating, and we all laugh together and we have fun together. But we had this time in the kitchen where we were just all kind of talking, and somehow Ariana comes up into the conversation, and Jonathan becomes emotional, of course, and Monica, and then me, and then Cosmo. And we're sitting there, and we're like, here's Cassini's 18th birthday, and everyone's laughing and stuff in the other room, but we're sitting there, and we're crying, and we're emotional. But which is totally okay. And my children now go, that's okay. And my 18-year-old daughter goes, Mom, it's okay. Like, they're not they've matured in a way to where they recognize that's okay.
Right.
And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that my children are not self-centered in a way of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're making this about blah, 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 or whatever. Like, they're able to have joy and sorrow and be okay with both of those things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I think that's
yeah. Hopefully things will lighten up soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that was a really rough question. We need some more like comical questions. You know, but
yeah.
it is a hard season of life in the world and in people's lives. So whoever this was for today,
yeah,
I hope it helped you some. Sorry we didn't make everybody laugh.
Yeah. All right. Well, love you, everybody. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.